Welcome to today's special episode where we're joined by Robyn Gobbel, a former therapist turned national best-selling author and educator, known for her innovative approaches to supporting children with complex trauma and challenging behaviors. In this episode, Robyn details the practical use of private podcasts in her membership and group coaching programs, highlighting how this approach caters to her audience's need for easy access and flexibility, especially because many of them are parents, and of course, the overall impact of private podcasting on her course delivery and its role in enhancing client engagement. She also casually drops at the end of the episode the way she uses a Start Here feed as a lead magnet. So good. Well, without further ado, let's dive right in.
Welcome to another case study episode. So excited to have Robyn Gobbel here. At the time of this recording, we are in the middle of her launch. So we're excited to get a little bit of insider information about how she's using her private podcast for her launch and also how she's used it in the past as well. So thank you, Robyn. I'm so excited that you're here.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm really looking forward to chatting.
Awesome. All right, let's dive right in. I'm so excited, first and foremost, to find out how you started using private podcasts. Maybe the first time you heard about private podcasts, but when did you hear about it? How did you hear about it? And when did you decide to use it for your own business?
I don't exactly remember how I heard about Hello Audio specifically. I do remember very clearly we were in the middle of the pandemic and I was shifting in many ways my own business and figuring out how I was going to do that, what that was going to look like, digital courses. I was just in the thick of learning about online business. And I'm sure it was in one of those groups I was in that somebody mentioned. In fact, it was probably Rachel Rogers, now that I'm putting this all together. Heard about Hello Audio, hopped into the Facebook group of Hello Audio, and I feel like it was the spring season where you guys were doing probably maybe similar to what you're doing right now, had a case study private podcast. And I just remember doing yard work outside and binging all of them, which is how I research things. Like, again, to see how are people using it? What's the I have a podcast. It felt like it made a lot of sense. I think there was a sale or a deadline.
Sounds about right.
So I'm like, okay, I'm all in. Let's go. Yeah.
I love it. I love that. I love that you put the sensory image of what you were doing, because I'm the exact way. When I'm taking in information, I remember when we were listening to the Serial podcast, driving from Northern California down to San Diego, we binged the whole thing. And I can remember when I go on that drive, I still think about that because it had such an impact on me.
Yep.
Weird side note. But it is related to what we talk a lot about where audio is very immersive. And so you're getting stuff done, but you also were taking in these case studies and learning stuff. And then we're able to kind of take action after the fact. Okay, cool. I have a bunch of ideas.
Right.
Let's go. Okay. So you had said to us prior to us recording that you actually use Hello Audio in a bunch of different ways in your business. So if you want to give us kind of a brief outline, you could also share the number of feeds you have. A lot of people are revealing that on the show, but no pressure.
I have enough. I have to scroll. I've used it in many different ways. So at this stage of my business, I have a membership and I have probably what most people call a group coaching program. So I use Hello Audio in a very traditional way with those programs, right? And that everything gets put into the podcast for the course participants or for the members so that they all have that way of consuming the content. I honestly am at a stage where I actually won't participate in something if it doesn't have podcast access. I left something recently because I was like, why can't you do this? It's not acceptable. This is a very simple solution to this.
Yeah, that was always our goal when we set out. We want to be people expect it. And now I feel we're still at the tipping point of that, but even still, people are just it's pretty standard now, or it's getting there.
Yeah. Well, and it's also not complicated. I mean, I understand technology and I'm probably maybe on the, top 50% of people who can use tech, but 51%. I'm not a tech wizard. So if I can use it, I kind of am come on, people, this is easy. So I use it in those programs for just another way of delivering the content to folks in a really easy way. Also works spectacularly well for my specific audience to have the barrier. They're not very tech savvy. They're very busy. They're very stressed out people. So the super easy access, of course, right in the podcast works very, very well for them. I used to have a digital course. I don't have it anymore, but similar. It was like a bonus to the digital course was the digital course in the podcast feed. I have used it in a couple different ways launching. I'm using it now to launch. It's a pop-up podcast in my major program, kind of the primary income part of my business. And I've used it like when I've taught online course, like one-off little online courses, again, as a bonus. Like you'll get the recording to this, but you'll also get it, you know, 60 days access in private podcast. I've used it for my one-on-one client to have a way that they can review our sessions. I don't do one-on-one clients anymore, but I've also used it in my coaching, like in my business coaching. And she's also a Hello Audio user, so I suppose she could do this too. But it's just easy for me. Like I get the recordings from her, and so I just pop them into my own private podcast.
Yeah,
so that I have
feed.
them.
Yeah.
Yep. So that I can listen to again just whenever I want to, and it's just so much easier.
Awesome. Well, you're using it how I imagine everyone could be. So it would be safe to say that for the most part, everything in your business, you try to offer audio if it makes sense.
That's a great summary. Everything.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's even taken us, we always joke about this. Like sometimes we're like planning this complicated thing and we're like, should we do audio of it? It's funny because I think we're there's some ingrained things I think with marketing, but then there's also, of course, we do creative stuff, but yeah, we get inspired from, folks like you who are using it in cool ways. Okay. So you've used it a lot for launching. I'd love to hear. I think that's a scary one, right? Like choosing to do it for launching. If you've done something successful year over year or quarter over quarter, you don't really want to mess with it. And so take us behind the scenes when you were like, okay, I see the value of doing this in a launch format, not just as a supplement to some other ways that I offer my products.
So I'm very rigid in some ways, but I'm very not rigid in other ways. So the idea of like, let's just kind of experiment with this and see how it goes doesn't stress me out. So when I first joined Hello Audio, my business was slightly different. I had a digital course. I launched it a couple of times in a kind of more traditional launching your digital course. I had a webinar. I don't like to do the same thing over and over again. I'm kind of bored by it. So I just thought, I'd been listening to all these ways people were using Hello Audio. I was like, well, I like to podcast. My husband's an audio guy. Like we have good audio tech. This just kind of makes sense for our life. And of course, what everybody loves about podcasting is I do it at 5 a.m. in my pajamas or, like there's so much freedom in podcasting. So I will say that was years ago. I don't remember how it converted, but that it absolutely converted in a way I expected. Well, this was great. This was
awesome.
So much less stress than a webinar. And it was just so chill. Like every day, I think I probably did just a 4-day audio series, short and sweet. Well, yeah, that's easy. They just go live in the morning. I'm not even thinking about it. My business works a little differently now. I've retired that digital course and I have this year-long group program that I do. I don't use this language, but your listeners probably do. It's quote unquote high ticket. And I started it after I'd already been using Hello Audio. So I've never launched this program any other way. I don't know if I was just creative or if I saw somebody else do it. I'm not really sure. But I have a 4-day audio series that brings people into both the contents of my group program as well as like the feel of it. I've really tried to craft this short audio program in a way that kind of gives people both experiences. Like this is what it feels like to train with me for a year. And also this is what you get from a very practical perspective if you train with me for a year. And so it has, private Facebook community. So the podcast I think is live for a week, has these 4 episodes. I do 2 Q&As in the Facebook group. And then I keep the podcast stream open. I take the episodes down, but I keep the feed open for about 2 weeks after the podcast itself ends, my launch is still going. My cart is still open. And so then I put different kinds of things into the feed. I have past course, I have student interviews. I'll do a open house for the group membership program next week. So when that, when that's finished, I'll pop the audio from that into that feed. So of course, the vast majority of people just show up and consume your free content and they move along their merry way. And that's wonderful. But then there's these people who keep hanging out, right? The stragglers who really are super interested in continuing on. And so then, I have this way of being, in their email, but also right in their podcast player. So I'm in the middle of my third year. I'm going to pause to let you ask questions because I'm really just rambling.
No, not at all. I love it. I think and I think Lindsay, you picked up on this too, because I saw your face when she mentioned it. And it's the vibe, right? It's the experiential part of a launch that it is challenging, I think, for a lot of folks using traditional methods like a webinar. It tends to, maybe depending on what, formula you use and what script you use and all the things, because we're always taught that there's, specific ways of doing it, right? It can sometimes not feel as personal. And I think we miss in a lot of the traditional launch methods, the ability to communicate how it will feel when you are with. We can future pace all we want to, we can talk about it, but to actually create the experience, I think is fantastic. And I agree. I mean, obviously we're a little biased because we know what audio can do, but I love that you've been able to use that as a way to let your potential clients, your future clients, feel what it's like to work with you. And and honestly, you're showing them that you respect their time, that you're showing them the ease and convenience piece of it and what it's going to be like, which I know a lot of us who have ever purchased, that coaching program we've wondered, can I make the calls? Is this going to be convenient? Am I going to have time for this? It's always a question that a buyer is going to have. So I love that you're addressing that through audio ahead of time in the launch. I think that says a lot. I am curious what feedback your audience has had, because I know when sometimes we've had folks that are ready to use private podcasts or they're thinking about it, they are really concerned about how it will be received by their audiences, especially if they don't necessarily consider their audience podcast people. So what did your people think of it?
I've never had anybody say anything but that it's great. I mean, I really don't know that I've ever had any other kind of feedback. I mean, I think some people who aren't typically used to consuming over podcasts are maybe a little bit I don't get it. It was almost seamless. There's so little friction. And aside from sometimes, the challenges we've occasionally had with Spotify, it is relatively frictionless. And the questions that people do ask, the friction they do have, they're very predictable. And so very quickly, we just learned how to answer people's questions, which, to be honest with you, is also a really great experience to have in a launch. Is when people ask a question, which is inevitable, so people are going to have questions, that we, know how to answer, that we can respond quickly. I mean, it's not good to have friction, but it is good to demonstrate, when there is friction, we can support you with this.
Yeah.
I have a podcast. And so I do think a lot of my listeners, a lot of my people who participate with me and really follow me are probably familiar with podcasting. But I know a lot of people are, using a podcast for the first time ever. They're like, you just have to click 3 buttons and there you go. You start listening. And they're like, okay.
Yeah, it's a bit, no logins. No, really, no logins.
Yeah, really.
Kind of nice. I think that's awesome. I'm curious how, if you've monitored consumption. So are you actively looking on the back end of your stats? Are you one of those people that kind of looks to see who's consuming it, how much they're consuming it? Are you kind of monitoring that level, or do you just kind of see that also through engagement and the questions that people are asking or how they're showing up through your launch?
I monitor how many people move from actually signing up to actually putting the podcast in their app, because they're not the same amount. And so I monitor that. I'm not actively monitoring it in this current launch. There's a lot going on right now, but I'll monitor it after the fact, right? Like I'll do it in my launch review. I don't spend a lot of time looking at like the actual individual downloads, except for comparing episode to episode. But I'm not looking at like, oh, there's 600 here. I don't care about the 600. I do care if there's 600 versus 2000. I'm going to be like, oh, that's interesting. Why the discrepancy? I don't have a ton of trust in general in podcast statistics. I just try not to get super bogged down in the actual numbers and look at them from a bigger perspective instead.
I love that. The trends versus,
yeah.
Can you share, since you said, I think this is the third time launching, if I'm correct, can you share things that you've learned along the way, adjustments that you've made, topic choice, deciding to drip or give it all at once, some of those kind of things, just as somebody who's done it a few times now?
I've made almost no change.
Well, there you go.
Which is awesome because launching is very stressful. I'm in the middle of this launch right now. I just published a book also. 4 weeks ago, I published a book. So I'm in the middle of a book launch period, which is not my plan. The book is supposed to come out in April, but I'm not in charge of when books publish. So my publisher's like, just kidding. And so I knew immediately this is way too close to the launch of my program that makes and breaks my business in a way that a book frankly doesn't. And so I have just had so much going on to prep for this specific launch. I've had to really just let kind of a lot go. But I'll also really like lean into the trust of like, I know what I'm doing. I've done this before. So I have a welcome episode that's there when people first sign up. So as soon as they put the podcast in their app, there's something that they can listen to. And then I drip an episode every day for 4 days. And they're very thoughtfully designed in how they're scaffolding people with both the information and the experience. And it works. So I really have made zero. And I've actually been like, can I be able to do this for 4 years in a row? Like, can I really not? Like, are people going to get sick of this? It's the same thing. And I do know a lot of people are, they come back.
They come back
every year. But I mean, in some ways I've gotten lucky. In some ways I've been doing this for a long time before I really executed something. So I had a ton of data that I could draw from to design something that didn't need a lot of change. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I knew my people. I knew what they needed. I knew how it was going to work. It's grown substantially every year. In fact, I absolutely cannot do this again without having somebody execute it with me. I have an assistant who's helping me answer emails and doing like the tech and, checking people's links and that kind of stuff. But I won't be able to do this again without having somebody like in the Facebook group with me. It's gotten too big.
You need help. Yeah. What do you attribute that growth to year over year?
I think it's probably pretty in alignment with just my general business growth. I think I actually have never compared those specific numbers, like this podcast growth numbers versus my overall like email list growth. My guess is they're pretty similar. And also having a podcast, I think, has contributed. But that's a guess. I'm just assuming that because I have a podcast that people listen to, it's easy for them.
You're bringing
to
in
say
new
yes
people
to
year over
yeah.
year. Yeah.
Did you run ads in this launch or was it mostly an organic traffic strategy? We get that question a lot from folks. They wonder if people are running ads to the audio piece.
I've never run ads ever. I don't even know how.
Awesome. So organic so organic works for those that are wondering. Organic absolutely works, have successful launches. The other question that we'll get is, I know we kind of said, the quote unquote high ticket. What is the price range of if you're comfortable sharing your coaching program? Because I think there are some questions of, can I really use private podcast to sell an X $1,000 program? So would you mind sharing that part as well?
Sure. In my field, I'm a social worker and support parents of kids who have trauma histories and then have really difficult behaviors. And then because there's not enough professionals who do that work, I, in the last couple of years, developed this group coaching program, which is a professional licensing program. So they train intensively with me for a year and then earn the licensing rights to use my material in their own businesses and their own practices. So they kind of get both this experience and then this product and then ongoing support. Like they can choose to re-up their licensing. And so this year, the tuition for the year is $58.50. I would guess that for 95 or higher % of the people who sign up, it'll be the biggest investment they've ever made. That is a very high number for my field. Yeah, so they're paying this tuition for like a year, but they actually get 2 years of experience the way the licensing works. So in my opinion, I mean, I've not ever launched this program with a webinar. I've launched other things with a webinar, though very low. Like I had a $200 course. I can't imagine connecting with people well enough in a webinar for them to trust this kind of investment. I really can't, like I would never even consider that. Between the audio and then I do offer this group discussion experience, with like any group, some people ask tons of questions, some people just lurk. And then I do two Q&As, and I think that is live Q&A. So that is a very big trust builder as well for people. Like when they see that I can really, answer their questions on the fly. And then those get popped into the feed. So I never think twice. I mean, that's the other thing. Like, I never care about what's a good time to offer this. I don't care. What's a good time for me to offer it? Like, I just never even think twice. Like, when are people available? What's the best time? Like, it's just so irrelevant to me. Who can come. And then it goes into the podcast feed afterwards. So between those audios, and then I actually do almost no marketing during that week as well. Like during that week, I'm very focused on, I want to give these people a valuable training. In fact, I tell them, like, I'm not answering questions about the program. When this week is done, here's how you'll answer questions. We'll do this open house. We'll do these. I answer people's questions as much as they need, and we'll hop on Zoom calls and stuff, but I won't do that during this week because I don't want this week to be about marketing. And I think people appreciate that too. The feel of the experience is really different than when you're being kind of constantly sold to. But because I have daily touch points with these people, I don't have to sell to them every day. And then when it's over, I'm like, all right, if you want to stick around, learn more about my program, here's what we're going to do next.
So you do drip the content. It's like a new piece releases every day. It's not all, they can't binge it.
Yes, they get an episode every day for 4 days.
Is your membership or I guess not membership, so program and then also the licensing pretty audio heavy too, or at least supplementally, they have the audio option?
So yeah, the audio is an option. That program has both an on-demand course that they do. So there's a feed for the on-demand course. And then we have weekly live meetings where we discuss the content and we implement it and we case consult and clinical application. So then those are recorded and those get put in a feed as well. So there's nothing that's really audio only. But audio is given for
I was wondering
everything.
If there's a connection to like, this is how we do things and this is an option. And maybe it convinces people who are like, oh, this is the first training that I've ever fully completed. So now knowing that she offers that, like, I have more confidence in the program in myself because she offers this option. Do you see any connection there?
I've never done anything to collect that data, but it feels like that's true. Because I can say, well, just like the podcast we did last week, all of the audio gets put into a podcast, which means people don't think this kind of stuff through, right? It's like, well, that means you don't have to use your browser. You don't have to log in, right? All these benefits of consuming via podcasts, you don't really think about those things until you aren't getting them.
Yeah.
Right. So you don't have to log in to Thinkific or whatever. I don't use Thinkific, but and let that run in the background. And then you're driving and you lose your all these things.
Yeah.
All the things. So I do think that is a very big, there's this on-demand aspect of my group coaching program with these live meetings. And so I've structured then my launch week to resemble that piece. There's this on demand, then we get together and we discuss it and implement it. You can ask me questions.
I love that. Now, in your
Yeah.
course, when you deliver the audio, do you keep one feed for what I would call your core curriculum or your core course content, and then another feed for your calls, those coach or those kind of live calls, or do you combine them in one feed? It's a question we get. I know people that do both. I'm curious what you choose to do.
I have 2 feeds because my on-demand course is delivered to every cohort year after year after year. So every cohort is subscribed to that feed. Then the live calls are in their cohort-based feed,
Love
if
that.
that makes sense.
Yeah, well, that's
Okay.
what we typically will recommend that people do. But I know sometimes, people don't always want, they think sometimes the multiple feeds, they don't want to have multiple feeds. I think it's kind of nice when you're kind of dominating someone's podcast player and there's,
Oh my
pictures
God.
of your courses when they open it. But I also think it's just
Mhm.
convenient for your folks too.
Oh, I mean, my like quote unquote super fans must sometimes some of them probably have 6 or 7.
I'm sure.
Truly, because I have my public podcast. And actually, I forgot to tell you, I have an evergreen opt-in that is a curated podcast, has 10 episodes in it from my public podcast. So people are always asking, where do I start? I literally made a podcast called Start Here. It is literally
Yep.
called Start Here.
Oh, I love that.
And I took 10 episodes that I already had. I didn't edit them at all. Intros, outros, there's outdated information in them. I didn't edit them at all. Just popped them into this private feed. I mean, I have like dynamic content that says, hey, some of these episodes are old. The podcast even called something different now.
You know what I like
Awesome.
about that? Because I see a lot of people sharing playlists now. And that's cool. Like the idea that you could be like, here's my Spotify playlist. I think there's use cases for that. But damn, if you missed that email, I'm telling you, the person who is into it and says, I need to know your A to Z like path or whatever, you should know who that person is. It shouldn't just be like, yes, it's shareable, but so is the link to the Start Here podcast. Like I think that's an even exchange, an email address for curated, thought through, selected things. And someone signs into that and they have an experience. And now they could just listen to your podcast weekly and they don't feel overwhelmed. I think folks who have multiple hundreds of episodes, that's how people feel when they first come to them. And I think, there's this trend happening where people are like, oh, here's my playlist. I'm like, cool, but get an email. You don't have those emails anyways from your podcast listeners. So anywho,
Right.
I'm glad you brought that up. I love that it's called Start Here. Very straightforward and also super helpful for your people for sure.
It actually, and it's also super helpful for us because we get the same questions over and over and over again. And I still have one. I have a list, like a PDF, and people seem to like the fact that there's this visual list. They're like, oh, that's so helpful. But I'm like, it's actually not that helpful because you still have to pull out your podcast player and you still have to find. And when it's done, then you have to go find the next one. Like the list, people, not that helpful. I mean, it really it's cut down on our work in many ways because people ask the same questions over and over again. It's like, you know what? Go here.
Yeah, I know people too that do that for, they're an agency or they do service-based work and they have a public podcast and they pull their most important episodes that they would want their clients to know about how they think about things and also pop that into like kind of an onboarding sequence. So I think it's really good to think about that customer journey, as Nora would like to say. What are they thinking about as they enter into your world? Like, what is the most important information? Because a lot of time, most of us produce a lot of content and it can be very overwhelming.
I use it that way. That's Start Here podcast in my membership when people onboard it. So my membership is for parents. It's a slightly different experience. And when people come in, they're in a whole lot of places about where they are and what they need from me. So one of the options, and it's not unique to the membership, you can just go get it on my website too. But one of the options when you onboard into the membership is if you are brand new to my material, you're brand new to this work, Start Here.
So basic, but like so good too. And so easy. I just want to also highlight a lot easier than I think a lot of people struggle with pulling from their content and putting it in a place that they can refer people to. It shouldn't be that hard, but I think the audio piece just makes it seem easier. Not a PDF. You're not doing a bunch of videos. Like, wait, that doesn't, maybe an email sequence that has links. That's a popular thing too, right? A welcome sequence. And it's like, here's my top stuff. And here's these blog posts that you're going to read. Like, what? Like, who's doing that? So this idea of a playlist is so powerful. I'm glad that nugget came out because I'm like, there's something there that I feel.
I forgot all about that. And I looked over here. I'm like, that's an important one.
You're like, that's a good feed.
Yeah.
Nice.
For the folks that are listening that haven't started, they're thinking about doing a private podcast, but they're not really sure. Do you have any advice or lessons learned that maybe you looking back, I mean, hindsight's always 20/20. So any advice for those folks who haven't really played with audio in their business?
I, as an online entrepreneur, am super comfortable with the experimenting process. And I actually really like the experimenting process. I'm pretty lucky and privileged is that my business does pretty well. So it's safe for me to take risks. And I wouldn't have come to kind of what I have now if I hadn't been willing. So it's like, I didn't know what I was going to do with Hello Audio when I purchased. I knew I listened to podcasts. I'm your avatar podcast listener. These people are my friends. The podcasting makes a lot of sense to me. It really resonates with me. It felt easy to consider, I guess. And I'm comfortable with the experimenting process, and also really truly the experimenting process with y'all's platform is so easy. So it is drag and drop. It's drag and drop. And when you have a question, you ask it. I'm like, oh, that worked great. I'll do that again. Or didn't love how that worked. Probably not going to do that again. That's cool. So I guess my very long-winded answer is experiment. See what happens. And then learn from it and do it again or don't. It's not it's easy to experiment. The risk isn't that high.
I think that's the key, right? With experiments. Is it worth it? Is it worth the time? When it's easy, makes it a lot easier to actually be willing to do it.
So on that topic of experimenting, do you have any feeds that you're like, I kind of want to try this? Something that's sitting in the back of your head that you haven't maybe put out there?
So all I've thought about for the last 2 years is writing and publishing a book. So I have zilcho creative.
Fair.
Energy right now. I'm looking,
giving it all.
Just yesterday, I was like, my brain is tired of the constant reach, something new, a new idea, a new this, I'm like, I just need a brain nap. So I am not currently sitting on a lot of creativity.
And I think that's fair enough.
I think it'll return.
Yeah.
But
well, you'll have to come back on the show, whatever that new feed is. I'm sure it'll be really cool.
I'd love to.
So we also end every episode asking, if you had a private podcast of your life ramblings, what do you think it would be called?
Oh, I mean, life ramblings is pretty close. As you've noticed, I am a rambler and I talk
so am I.
a lot, and I am not actually terribly creative.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and we're talking about the depletion. So,
but also even naming my book, I worked on my book I wrote a proposal. I wrote a book. I turned in my book and I'm like, well, good luck finding a title. I literally turned in a book that did not have a title.
Well, what is the title?
It is called Raising Kids with Big Baffling Behaviors, Brain Body Sensory Strategies That Really Work. It's 1,000 years long.
It's a lot of title.
It's a lot of words in that title.
It's straight. Yeah, totally.
It is absolutely, that's true. And people have said that. Well, I know exactly what I'm picking up. I'm like, well, sure. You can hardly fit all those words on the cover, but whatever. I'm not in charge.
I love that. I like that. Just start here. It's very clear, which I
really.
A lot of people nowadays, they just really appreciate clear.
Well, thanks for hanging out with us with all you have going on. We will definitely link to all the exciting things that you're up to, all the feeds. You guys can go test it out. Yeah, we super appreciate you sharing all your knowledge with us.
Thank you for having me. This has been fun.
And there you have it, audio heads. Another episode of Launch Your Private Podcast is in the books. I hope you're leaving today feeling even more ready to amplify your voice and connect with your audience in meaningful ways. The adventure continues in our next episode with even more insights, strategies, and inspiration to help you along your own private podcasting journey. Of course, make sure to check out helloaudio.fm to start your own private podcast. And remember, you've got amazing content that needs to be heard, so let's turn the volume up. Until next time.